Well, good afternoon. My name is Dean Cheng. I'm the Senior Research Fellow for Chinese Political and Security Affairs at the Heritage Foundation. I'd like to thank the Warsaw Security Forum for the opportunity to be here today. The title of this panel is Perspectives for the U.S.-China Rivalry and its European Angle. I am going to suggest, politely, that this title, however, is slightly misleading. It implies that China is mainly an American problem, with Europe afforded the opportunity to observe from the side. But the reality is that China increasingly poses a challenge to both sides of the Atlantic. Europe is not immune to China's willingness to sanction parliamentarians over their support for fundamental human rights, to China's flouting of international trade rules, to China's efforts to subvert and undermine democratic political processes. Similarly, if China is successful in its economic efforts to establish dominance in key sectors and supply chains, this will affect both the United States and Europe, as well as Asia. Consequently, China's rivalry is arguably with the West as a whole, and only a coordinated Western response that includes, but is not limited to, the long-standing transatlantic relationship can hope to succeed. To discuss these issues, we have with us today four exceedingly qualified individuals. Their biographies are available online, so I will provide only the briefest of outlines. In alphabetical order, Dr. Benedetta Berti, who specializes in human security, non-state armed groups, and international security, and is currently and has served as head of policy planning in the Office of the Secretary General at NATO since 2018. Next is Teresa Fallon, director for the Center for Russia, Europe, and Asia Studies in Brussels, and who has in the past been a member of the Strategic Advisors Group for the NATO Supreme Allied Commander Europe. Joining us remotely is Mike Rogers. Representative Rogers was chairman of the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence in the U.S. Congress and is also a member of the board of directors of the Atlantic Council. Interestingly, he is also a former U.S. FBI agent, special agent. And finally, Radoslav Sikorsky, a member of the European Parliament of the European People's Party, who is also joining us virtually. He has previously served in a variety of positions, including the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister of National Defense, and Marshal of the Siem. So, I'm going to begin by asking Dr. Berti. In the wake of the Australia, UK, US, or AUKUS agreement, France in particular, but also the EU, has stated that transatlantic relations are in a crisis. Thierry Breton, the EU Commissioner for Internal Markets, said in an interview with CNN that something is broken between our relations in Europe and the US. If the West is going to confront China, divisions in the transatlantic relationship will undermine the unity of that effort. In your view, how can the two sides of the Atlantic work to fix the broken elements of our relations in order to deal with China?
Thank you, and thank you for that excellent question. I think maybe I will slightly push back towards the framework that something is broken and needs to be fixed. I think that's something we need to pause and reflect. Of course, we have one ally that is especially disappointed about this particular deal. It's also a security arrangement made between two allies, the United Kingdom and the United States, with a NATO partner, Australia. And overall, the objective is to increase security in the Indo-Pacific, which in turn would have also a positive, I would say, repercussion for the Euro-Atlantic area. So I would say let's pause a little bit about how big this crisis is, and instead, with my couple of minutes, I would like to point out that overall, despite the fact that there are questions asked about the transatlantic relations. There are divergences between allies. This is nothing new. But I think when it comes to looking at the big picture, which is what really matters, here the story I see is actually one of growing convergence rather than divergence, at least for the organization where I work, for NATO. And if you think about how allies have spoken about China in NATO, I think that's a very important story. Before 2019, China was simply not on the NATO agenda. became part of our political discussions with the 2019 leaders meeting in London, in which allies recognize there are challenges and opportunities related to China's rise, and they have an impact on our security, and we need to look at them together. Now, fast forward to the last summit, June 2021, and I can say the convergence is growing, and it's also the analytical basis for that convergence is becoming more and more sophisticated. If you look at the last communique, which is how the alliance expresses itself as the sum of all its 30 allies. Here we're talking about a world of growing strategic competition. We are recognizing systemic competition from assertive and authoritarian powers as a trend shaping our security environment. And we're recognizing that this has a direct impact on the rules-based international order and that it has an impact on our security. We refer to China and to China's growing influence and recognizes that it presents challenges to our security. And then, of course, we say many other things, including looking at with concerns at the military modernization and the nuclear modernization when it comes to the Chinese military forces, looking at the use of disinformation, calling out coercive policies that go against the rules-based international order. So there's a series of elements that, to me, indicate that there is actually a growing convergence across the Atlantic when it comes to understanding that this is a defining trend shaping our security environment and we need to respond to it together. And just to close on it, and I'm sure we'll have a chance to go back, another important point that all allies agreed to in June is that in order for us to deal with these systemic challenges, we need to work even more closely with like-minded partners, near and far, from Sweden and Finland to Japan, Australia, Korea, and New Zealand, our AP4, our Asia-Pacific partners. So all of this was agreed in June by all the 30 allies. So I wouldn't say that we don't have a strong basis.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sikorsky, Europe and China completed the Comprehensive Agreement on Investment in late 2020. However, Chinese actions against the Uyghurs has led to the freezing of the agreement by the European Parliament, as well as, of course, the Chinese sanctions placed upon various parliamentarians. Short of major Chinese changes in their attitudes, do we foresee any thawing of this agreement? And if not, does the resulting patchwork of bilateral investment treaties ultimately leave gaps that China can exploit, dangling investment opportunities in front of various members and seeking to divide and conquer?
China has, during the pandemic, become our biggest trading partner. And I'm afraid it's not because we've started exporting more, but because we've been importing more. According to briefings by the Commission made to us in the European Parliament, the CAI agreement would simply have been leveling up to your stage 1 agreement during the Trump administration. I don't think that's this important an issue. I authored a report for the European Parliament, which has now been overwhelmingly voted through and is now the policy of the European Parliament towards China. And I proposed the following doctrine. Cooperate where possible, confront where necessary, compete where necessary, confront where unavoidable, which I think chimes in well with US policy. We've just seen the launch of the Trade and Technology Council, which I think is an excellent development. And it's in that area, trade, technology, investments, production standards, that we need to set minimum standards where we are equals, because we are equal-sized economies. And that will be the main area of allied collaboration. Because on military, there is a difference both of interest and of capacities. The countries that envelop China in the Far East are military allies of the United States. For us, they are fellow democracies, but are not our military allies. And our public will not allow us to make guarantees to those countries. So there will be a difference. We will maintain an arms embargo on China, but we will not get involved out there militarily. And lastly, let me just say that I feel that it's China that's made a major mistake. You know, under Deng, they had the doctrine of build your strength and play for time. And it's China's wolf warrior diplomacy that has offended people, that has pushed whole countries, and that has created an anti-China coalition in the Far East. We actually discussed issues to do with the EU-US collaboration over China here in Strasbourg yesterday. And I'm worried that if these provocations around Taiwan get worse, all America's bandwidth and all of its resources will be devoted there, with obvious consequences for Europe.
Thank you very much. Mr. Rogers, following up on Mr. Sikorsky's comments, he poses a very great concern here about the prospect that the United States might become so focused on Asia that it begins to neglect its concerns, its commitments, and even perhaps its interests in Europe. Given your time in the House, including on the Intelligence Committee, what can you say that would hopefully be reassuring, or if not, cautionary in this regard to the European audience?
Well, first of all, Dean, thank you for having us. It's great to see you. Wish I was there in person. And to our Polish friends there, thank you for sponsoring this. You know, I have to say that Poland is becoming a key ally. They're emerging as a key ally for NATO, for the United States. So I can't wait till next year when we can be there all in person, let's hope. So here's where China is. And so what I think Europe is a little bit behind the United States in encountering that wolf warrior diplomacy, as Mr. Sikorsky talked about. And it happens in several ways. One, it's a state-controlled economy where they do pick winners and losers, and they're willing to put the full weight of government in every aspect, from intelligence to military to economics, behind a particular sector of the economy so that they can win that fight. That's coming to Europe in a more aggressive way, number one. And number two, when you look at issues like the social credit score, once these things get out into the public more, I think across Europe, that China is actually taking data from its citizens and then using it to give them a credit score, including their position on the Communist Party, and then use it against them to buy tickets, to buy train tickets, to buy airplane tickets, really to curtail freedom of movement. I think you're going to see a better alignment here. So can we do two things at once, Dean? I think that's the question. And I say absolutely. And matter of fact, I don't think we can have, we the United States, a successful counter policy to China if we don't have our European allies with us. We have to do this together, including markets. So remember that China wants a fragmented EU. They want capital against capital. They want country against country because it serves their purposes. And so when you look at even from economics and trade and the way that they have built their economy on stolen intellectual property, again, all of that is coming with a vengeance to Europe. And so, again, what we hope to do is build those coalitions, revive those coalitions. And sure, like Winston Churchill said, the United States always does the right thing after they do everything else. And so we're in the process of trying everything else, but we're going to be back in a way that I think our European allies will be assured. And remember, the pivot that you often hear about against China is just our military positioning is a big part of that. So, how we refocus assets of the United naval forces to counter a growing threat to our allies in the Pacific Rim. Those are the kinds of things that we can do both. And we can count on our NATO allies in Europe to help us stand up policies on this end. And so I think once we get through what that military posture looks like, and we continue to engage in the EU on both economics and a tightening of information sharing, I think you're going to find that we're going to be in a better place. I just think we've got to go through this. And we're going through it right now. And America has some fits and starts, no doubt. But I think we're getting now where we can start to settle into this notion that we all should be concerned about China and its activities. It doesn't play fair in the marketplace. It doesn't play fair when it steals citizens' information. It doesn't play fair when it steals intellectual property and competes against European companies of which they stole it. All of that we know is coming because we've seen it before. So I'm optimistic about this. It just means that we have a few snags to get through, Dean.
If I could follow up on that, given your position in the past on the Intelligence Committee, what do you see as perhaps some of the best methods of getting this information out, not only to friends and allies in government, but also to the broader public?
I mean, this is the hardest question maybe of the day. So if somebody said, what keeps you up at night? It is the capabilities that we see coming out of the Chinese Communist Party when it comes to cyber espionage, disinformation campaigns, everything to work against the very fabric of our liberal democracies. And they're getting better at it. And so what we've got to do is start talking about it, just not only politically, but we have to engage it in conversation across every public of every European nation so that people understand what China is actually doing. You know, polling across Europe of recently shows that, yes, they don't trust China across Europe pretty uniformly. They don't think that they ought to be completely engaged with China without one eye open when they're falling asleep. But that tells me that we just haven't taken that extra step about telling them the activities of which China engages in that is not in their individual best interests either. China talks about being data dominant by 2025, Dean, and that means they want to control the flow of data and have a compilation of data that puts every citizen candidly in the world at risk, and they are well on their way to do this. And they do that through this state subsidy of their telecommunications companies, of which we know they're collecting data and then evaluating that data back in Beijing. Remember that social credit system where they're denying plane tickets? Well, guess what? If they don't like what you're saying, maybe in 4 or 5 or 6 years, and you're from Poland or Germany or France, you might not be able to get the deal that the state controls in China. So again, I think this is a PR campaign. It's a public campaign. We're still working on it here in the United States. I think we're over the top on this now. But it took us a while for even our own population to understand that, yep, they're cheap goods are great to have. However, nothing that cheap comes at a price, right? And it does have a price. It has a price in our governance model and sustaining our liberal democracies. And trust me, the weaker they are, and they also have a good partner in this, Russia, the better that they look in the future dominance of both the economy and by the way, just international influence. And so all of that's kind of happening now. We just have to do a better job of talking about it.
Ms. Fallon, having heard these various perspectives, as well as having been on a panel together this morning looking at public opinion issues, what do you see in terms of the prospects for this kind of greater education and greater concern? And let me follow that up also with, you wrote one of the earlier reports identifying China as a burgeoning challenge for NATO and for Europe. And so if you could also look into your crystal ball and give us a sense of maybe 2 or 3 of the things that are currently below the radar that perhaps will also be of greater import in the coming years.
Thank you so much, Dean. And thank you to the organizers of this conference. It's been such a joy to be here in person talking with all of you. The danger of this panel is that we're all violently in agreement. And I think that we all see China as a challenge. But I think I just want to clarify that we're talking about the Chinese Communist Party. I was posted to Beijing from 2003 to 2007, and my children have appeared in I don't know how many Chinese families' photo albums as they're dressed in red snowsuits with the Chicago Bulls. But anyway, I just want to make clear that it's nothing to do with the Chinese people, but the Chinese Communist Party. I would say that on the horizon, issues that I think that people aren't really paying attention to or close enough attention to, one would be the peace cable. This is a Chinese-owned Battle of the Bottom type of cyber optic cable that starts in Pakistan, goes to North Africa, and will land in Marseille, France. So I think China carefully chose a country they thought that would cooperate with them on this. And I think that this poses a possible challenge for security of communications for NATO. I know many people are very concerned about this. Another issue, and I'm glad Mike Rogers brought this up, that the TTC event in Pittsburgh took place. There was, because of AUKUS, there was some concerns that the French would put pressure to postpone or to even cancel this event. And I think transatlantic cooperation and technology is key to, we all have to work together on all of this. And you know, the idea of dual-use goods. We've seen in the past, for example, Belgian and German dredgers helped build the South China Sea islands, which are now a huge security issue for the United States in that region and other countries. So I think that we really have to be cautious about doing this type of business with China, but it's really difficult to do. And that's not so obvious when someone rents a dredger. But there are other even more obvious things. For example, the sale of 27 silent diesel submarine engines by a German company to the PLA Navy, which helped them leapfrog dramatically their military capacities or capabilities. So I think really clear tech transfer issues need to be hammered out between the US and Europe. Also, this idea of systemic rival language, as Mr. Sikorsky had pointed out, the EU approaches China with a multifaceted approach, so a systemic rival, partner, and competitor. But China constantly is trying to get rid of this systemic rival language. I just saw a post this week from the Chinese mission saying, we aren't rivals, you know, we're not systemic rivals. So that language really irritates them, and they want to remove that because they want to have more common ground with the EU. And I would also add the education Silk Road. Of course, there are many, many Silk Roads, but the education Silk Road is a long-term issue, and we've seen the Confucius Institutes, the Confucius classrooms, and now in Hungary, they're going to build a Fudan University campus. And so they are eager to cultivate the future leaders of this region and have them follow kind of a Chinese approach to the world, to see the world through a Chinese lens. And I think that this poses a real challenge for our future. And lastly, lawfare. There is an inability of people to speak up because they're afraid now that Chinese will sue them. We've seen, for example, Valérie Niquet said something about Huawei in the French media, and she is being sued, and this has been going on for several years. I know other journalists having the same problem. So I think this also increases the level of self-censorship. And finally, okay, lack of China expertise, because everyone's really afraid now to go and study in China. And so we are going to lose young people wanting to learn Chinese, to have expertise on China, and so this will really blind us over the longer term. Thank you.
Thank you. This is intended to be an interactive panel, and so I've opened the floor now to questions from our audience, both physical as well as virtual. So please, are there any questions from the audience? And wave your arm vigorously, because I'm afraid that the lights up here are, there's a bit of lens flare. So let's see. Yes, the gentleman in the yellow tie. I don't know if there's a microphone or... Oh, sorry, on the left there to go up. Oh, there are people already lining up. I'm sorry. So please, let's start with the gentleman already at the microphone. That's
yes,
you.
hi. My name is Adrian Mendoza from the Hertie School in Berlin. I would like to ask, perhaps what we see from China is not so much them taking initiative, but more of a reactionary response to what the NATO and the US is doing in the Pacific, by building alliances that is surrounding the nation and at the same time making them more isolated. Perhaps that's the argument I will go for, and I would like to hear your opinion on that. Thank you.
I'm going to direct that actually to Mr. Sikorsky, because I think that actually goes directly to his comment. So please.
I would disagree with the premise of the question. I think it's China that's taken the initiative. it is China that is a revisionist power that wants to become number one in the world. And it is China that's been aggressively punishing countries. All Australia did was to ask for an independent inquiry into the origin of the pandemic. And China has very aggressively targeted Australian investments and trade, and has basically made an enemy of Australia, which was unnecessary. Australia was very friendly, and they were very close a few years ago. So no, we need to be aware of the nature of what we are seeing. China has abolished its rotation of leadership, and it's Mr. Xi who has made China far more assertive than before. And let's remember that it's China that has publicly stated that it will recover control of Taiwan either peacefully or otherwise, which is, of course, not how we do politics in international politics in the West.
Thank you. Next.
Thank you. My name is Jacob Knop from University of Warsaw. Firstly, I'd like to thank you for the passionate discussion. And my question is the containment strategy, which proved successful during the Cold War, a viable approach when it comes to dealing with modern-day PRC? Given the economic prowess of China, many experts argue that in the long run it is likely to fall short. And if containment isn't an answer, then how do we minimize the risk of a potential armed conflict? Thank you.
Want to take that one?
I'm getting the containment one? Okay, sure. Sure, why not? I mean, I think, first of all, it's an excellent question. And there's certainly a lot of thinking about what is the right approach and the right balance. I think there's a few very important differences that need to be taken into account, and first and foremost, the level of economic interdependence and the fact that the globalized economy has completely changed the parameters of how we look at our interconnection as economies and societies. So the idea that you can have a neat isolation or containment like in the Cold War, I think that boat, that sail, a ship, that ship has sailed, here we go. So I don't think that a cut and paste of anything like that is likely to work, personal opinion. However, the question remains, what is the right level of economic interdependency that does not create critical vulnerabilities in our societies? And I think different countries are struggling and grasping with that question in a different way. We could talk about it for hours, but we don't have hours. So in 30 seconds, I would say one element that we really need to put front and center of this is how do we build up the resilience of our own society? How do we ring fence our democracies, our institutions, our critical infrastructure, our critical assets, our critical technologies? How do we make, in a way, and especially I think on the European side, a mind shift in terms of thinking about critical vulnerabilities and dependencies, not just in terms of economic opportunities, but also in terms of potential vulnerabilities. So how do we bring the national security dimension when we make choices about foreign direct investments, about foreign infrastructure, about supply chain security? In other words, that's not the complete answer to that monster of a question of how do you tackle China, but I think one element that I would put on the table is really boosting our own resilience and working together with like-minded partners also to protect the rules-based international order and advance its reforms and its rejuvenations. But it's one piece of a broader puzzle, obviously.
And that is why I gave you that question. A reminder to the virtual audience, we are also taking questions virtually as well as in person. So please submit them to the website if you have one. Next.
Hello, Jans Ahlefeldt, Chairman of the Association of German Polish Parliamentary Staff. Probably a question for Teresa Fallon. we're all kind of fascinated or shocked by the rise of China. But is there not also a potential scenario of the decline of China? I think I remember 10 years ago, we were all worried about potential social unrest, migration waves from China, migrant laborers coming all across Eurasia to Europe. Is that all gone just because of the tough talk of Xi, or are there still the potential cracks in the system that we should be aware of? Thanks.
I'll direct it directly to you.
Thank you for that excellent question. I think that this is pretty much a decade of concern, as many analysts have described it. And so Xi Jinping is really seeing his window of opportunity closing rather quickly. And he's hitting demographic issues with the one-child policy. Replacement rate in China is now 1.3. So by 2066, the population will not grow anymore at all. And so I think that they are very concerned by this. Plus, the economy is tanking. We're seeing all these daily reports about Evergrande, other organizations, and Xi Jinping is almost destroying the golden goose because as a Chinese Communist Party is trying to control society, they're also kind of cutting off the ability to innovate. And organizations like Didi, which is kind of similar to Uber in Europe, but because it has control over mass amounts of data, they've been cracked down on. Jack Ma, Alibaba, these organizations, anything that is seen as a possible competitor to the Chinese Communist Party is being really controlled. And so this might really hurt the growth of the Chinese economy, and Xi Jinping doesn't really care right now. All he wants is to maintain control of the Chinese Communist Party and make sure that it exists. So what does this mean for the Chinese long-term economy? I would suggest, as many analysts have said, that we've already passed peak China. And even this kind of low China price that we've all come to expect, we've seen a dramatic increase in container price. Before COVID, 950 euro per container. Today, 11,000 per container. So the world is in a very important period of transition and change, and I'm very concerned about what this will mean. But I think that the window on China is definitely closing. It's not going to continue this way. And let's remember that the arc of history doesn't always bend towards justice. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Next.
Hello, Piotr Kołtyś. I'm from Collegium Civitas. My question is regarding the recent news on China regarding their energy shortages. The previous panel was mentioned about the energy security of European Union. We mentioned also Nord Stream 2. So my question is how such problems, which occurred also in China, we can use as the leverage for our policy making, how we can learn on such problems which they also have, so do we, and what should be our answers to it, because already China posts tremendous orders on tremendous amounts of money on coal from European Union as well. How we should face such problems? Thank you.
Mr. Rogers, would you care to try and take that one on?
Yeah, sure will. And just to the last point, by the way, be wary of folks who think because of their economic problems, China will go quietly into that good night, into chaos. If history has taught us anything, is that total, complete state control governments like the Chinese Communist Party will ride that thing out for much longer than most people would normally tolerate. And you can find that all examples. Cuba is a great example, certainly in our hemisphere. The Soviet Union was really a shadow of itself for almost 15, 20 years before it finally collapsed. It takes a long time for trouble to brew when you control all the leverages of force and brute force in China. I think that's what you saw in Hong Kong. You're going to see something very similar in Taiwan, I think. On the energy piece, I mean, listen, I'd be a little cautious about where China has been thinking about this for 20 years. If you think about in the last few years, China has invested and built 3 times more coal plants than the rest of the world combined. About 70% of all the coal plants being built recently were built in China. And so despite what their rhetoric is to the rest of the world, they're behaving as if they know they're going to have an energy problem and where can they get the energy that they need to meet their demand. So I think you're going to see a China that is a little bit more astute and a little bit quicker and edgier than the rest of the world, certainly liberal democracies, at getting around their energy problems. Because they may say that they'll do the Paris Accord, but they've got the problem of needing this energy and they need it soon to maintain the Chinese economy. Guess what? That's exactly what they're going to do. We want them to behave in a way that looks like the rest of the world. They're just not going to do it. So energy is, I think, the more countries that can get away from importing of their energy from countries that have ill intent, I would put Russia in that category as well, the better off we're all going to be. That's going to take real change. It's going to take us all working together and understanding that it's a glide path. It isn't a cliff. We're going to have to work to get down that glide path to make sure that happens. And the closer we get to that, the more influence you'll have on pushing China to be better economic citizens of the world. Right now, they're ravaging countries. They're ravaging their intellectual property. By the way, they're locking up natural resources for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. That's why they're in Africa, candidly. And we can see what they're doing. Their behavior in Africa is not that great. And you can see what they're doing. It's all about their natural resources again. So don't write them off yet. I think that they're positioning themselves to be on the top of the heap because they really don't care what kind of energy they're going to use to get there.
Thank you very much for an excellent panel, Ivan Lidare from the New Security Leadership Program. Obviously, there are severe limitations to how much Europe can participate in Indo-Pacific security. So in many ways, the big question is not how individual countries can participate, such as, for example, France or Britain or Netherlands, but how institutionally we can do this. So my question is essentially, what potential do you believe a relationship, cooperation between NATO and the Quad, for example, exists, and NATO, for example, in the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium? Do you see potential for this? What would trigger such cooperation, in your opinion? Thank you.
Well, we have someone here from NATO. So.
Well, I'll take the NATO question. Yes, I would start by saying that there are a lot of issues that are related to Indo-Pacific security and Euro-Atlantic security, where NATO can and is working together with partners from the region. That does not necessarily mean operationalizing a military presence in the region, but the fact is many of the threats we face are really think of cyber threats, think of hybrid threats, think of economic vulnerabilities, think of boosting resilience. We can work and we should work with our like-minded partners, including in the Indo-Pacific, on all of these issues. And ultimately, this reinforces both Euro-Atlantic and Indo-Pacific security. So I think that's something that we are doing and we should continue to do. In terms of the way forward, is there going to be a NATO Quad type of arrangement? That is an excellent question. I think we will have to wait and see. What I can tell you is that at the last summit, allies agreed that one of their priorities when it comes to partnership is Asia-Pacific partnerships. We have 4 Asia-Pacific partners. I mentioned them before: Japan, Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. And with those, we have been boosting ties. We have been cooperating more on issues such as countering hybrid threats, cybersecurity, disinformation. So we have a really strong basis to build on. And I do definitely see the merit in exploring how an organization NATO can continue to strengthen its cooperation with like-minded partner and organizations in the Indo-Pacific.
Thank you very much. And I'm afraid that with that, our time has run out, at least if that counter in front of us is correct. So I do ask the audience to join me in a round of applause for our panel members.